Welcome to the Whole Story podcast. This podcast series is focused on inspiring sustainability in agriculture, using the framework of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, also known as the SDGs. Each week, our guests are invited to share their story and leave us with some practical tips for sustainability on farms. I'm Becks Smith, founder of The Whole Story, a B Corp certified social enterprise inspiring, facilitating and articulating holistic sustainability in agriculture. And this podcast has been brought to life in partnership with the incredible team at FMG, who are passionate about partnering with organisations like The Whole Story, so together we can support rural New Zealand. So whatever you're doing while listening to this episode, thanks for choosing us. The best way you can support our mahi is to follow and share the show on whatever app you're listening on, and I hope this episode leaves you inspired and excited about the bigger picture of sustainability in agriculture. Today on the Whole Story podcast, I get the incredible opportunity to sit down with Amanda Hasselman from Temple Peak Station, a Toitū certified Carbon Zero sheep and beef farm at the head of the Wakatipu Valley. As well as farming alongside her husband Mark, Amanda has been a trustee on the Routeburn Dart Wildlife Trust for 10 years since its inception, and is part of the Southern Lakes Sanctuary, and within both roles is deeply passionate about predator management for restoration and protection of our native biodiversity. Having farmed Temple Peak Station since 1979, through the era of Livestock Incentive Schemes, Tenure review, a change in breed, and now the shift to regenerative agriculture and becoming a Toitū certified Carbon Zero farm, they sure have seen some change, challenge and opportunity in their time. Now, as per usual, it wouldn't be an episode of the Whole Story podcast without a behind-the-scenes challenge. See if you can spot the point at which Glenorchy's internet drops out, which is apparently quite a common occurrence. But no bother, a quick app download and a recorded telephone call later, and we were back in business. I hope you enjoy this episode and the perspectives of someone who, after walking the hills for many years, is now starting to hear the music of the valley, who sees a real role for farming and conservation to occur in the same space, and is excited about farm succession and the potential within our industry with the continued opportunity to learn. Welcome along today, everybody. Today we have joining us Amanda Hasselman from Temple Peak Station. How are you today, Amanda?
Oh, really good, thanks.
Perfect. And I think if we just dive straight into it then, can you tell us a little bit of a story about yourself, your farming business, who you are, where you're farming and what you're farming?
Sure. Well, we're a small Carbon Zero sheep and beef farm in a stunning location at the head of Lake Wakatipu. My partner bought the place with family help in 1979. At that stage, it was an 8,000 hectare pastoral lease jammed between Waiuna and Reese Valley. But we decided to go through the process of tenure review, which we completed in 2013. And so now we're 1,600 hectares with about 12 years left of a 21-year grazing licence out the back. We're small scale. We're 1,300 ewes, 1,000 wethers, 900 hoggets, and about 100 breeding cows, plus the replacements. Yeah, Temple Peak's a glorious part of the world. We must have some of the best views anywhere, looking into the south face of Earnslaw and way up the peaks of the Dart and the Beansburn. But, it's marginal farming country. It's steep hill country with about 80 hectares of flat, probably 400 hectares of developed hill country, and then the rest is tussock. So it's not the place you'd choose to farm if you're really interested in being an efficient farmer, but it is one of the most beautiful places in the world. So that's why we're here, really. And farming keeps us here, which is great. In the early days with Livestock Incentive Schemes, we were encouraged to overstock, which we did. And, it was a slower process. We realised over time that we had to cut back and make a few changes because the death rate was too high and we weren't getting the productivity.
Yeah, it's an amazing location that you're farming in. You talk about those beautiful views. It's stunning. It's quite a remote place to live and work. How do you manage that, having been there so long now? Do you enjoy the isolation or do you find it a bit of a challenge sometimes?
Look, it's not remote at all now compared with 40 plus years ago. And, 40 plus years ago wasn't remote at all compared with the boat days. But the Glenorchy's changed a huge amount. And then, in the early days when I first came here, it was very much a farming community and Department of Conservation and a very small tourism community. But now we've got a really wide cross-section of people. And I think people who stay, the single common denominator is that they're all here because they love the place. And so they make all sorts of really interesting compromises to build a life here. And so people have got an amazing range of jobs that they pull together, some onshore, some offshore. And, that common love of place is a great way to build a community. So we have it's a growing community, but it's a good community that does, looks after itself and helps other people. So, I think that's what a lot of people are looking for in the world, a sense of community and a sense of belonging. And, we're incredibly lucky to have it.
Yeah, I think definitely you talk about that common purpose and that sense of place. It does build really strong community ties in Glenorchy. It's an incredible place, and I love visiting when I do manage to get the chance to go along the windy road up there. So I guess then a big question, and the word sustainability can mean so many different things to so many different people. And so I'd like to hear, Amanda, what does sustainability mean to you?
Yeah, it's been such an abused word, hasn't it? As far as we're concerned, it means living within the constraints of the natural environment. And farming's been on an interesting roller coaster for the last 30 years or so, hasn't it? It's been about increasing intensification, increasing production, and most farm advice has come with a product attached to it. And I suppose we chose not to follow that route, probably because we couldn't really, because it's hard a farming country. So we spent a lot of time at the back of the pack going, well, this is enough. And I think, the whole word sustainability, I'm not sure it's quite right for the direction in which we probably should be heading as a planet. And I wonder if, words like sufficiency are better about what we've tried to do here. The economic system has just led us down this path of more, and the planet just can't cope with that. And so we might be better just trying to think about things in terms of, what's enough. And I think that's why the whole regen movement is getting traction. Most farmers have a huge appreciation and love of their place. They don't want to trash it, but we're only as good as the knowledge that we can learn. And that knowledge has been very product based. So, yeah, an interesting response, but possibly, yeah, I think sustainability might not be where we should be focusing. And I think if we start thinking of things like sufficiency, a lot of words that actually, really useful for how we build community come back into the language again. Kindness, caring, community, not so much of this transactional focus on life, but much more of a relational focus. As I said before, I think most of us are looking for community, and the more we can do in that space, the better we'll all be. And it builds resilience, and that's what we're going to need if AF8 goes. So,
yeah, I think definitely living within our means. And I love that recognition of not only the ecological limits, but also the financial limits of, I guess, our personal health and well-being limits and our community limits. So actually sufficiency rather than striving for more at the cost of everything. It's an interesting reflection, isn't it, that we are seeing a bit of a tide of movement going towards probably reflecting inwards. And I love that more relational approach to life and business. I think it's a really key point to be mindful of.
I mean, it's interesting. I said before, I really enjoy living in the community that I'm part of. And I think the difference between rural and urban communities is there's no free pass. I mean, I was just thinking last night, we've got a community nursery, we've got a first response group, we've got the school, rural fire, sports groups, the museum, play group, a dark skies sanctuary group, a community association, we're all women. Oh, book club. That's without really scratching my head and doing any in-depth research about it. So, most people are part of something, and that's the real pleasure. Book club, yeah, sure, we focus on the book initially, but the real pleasure is the chat that we have around it and finding out more about your neighbours. So, I think sustainability, it's a journey. We've got 5 mokopuna now, and they're all very smart cookies, and I really want to have an answer for them when as teenagers they come asking all those hard questions saying, Granny, you knew, why didn't you do anything? So that's behind a lot of our thinking. We want some more intergenerational thinking so that they've got a good future ahead of them.
Yeah, and that really ties into some work I was doing this morning, actually. I don't know if you've seen this book from Dr. Hinemoa Elder, that Araha book. It's beautiful for all of the listeners who haven't got their hands on this. It is Araha. It's Māori wisdom for a contented life lived in harmony with our planet. And there's a beautiful whakatauki in there discussing the risk of apathy and exactly that. How do we respond to our children when they ask, where were you and why didn't you do anything? And I think it just really got me reflecting this morning, and I brought it up at one of the board meetings that I was chairing. But I just think it's a really poignant fact to run strongly away from apathy and be active in our response for our children, our mokopuna, and planet Earth.
At the moment, it would be really easy to shove your head under a rock and go, my gosh, we've taken the wrong direction. But there's some really cool community action happening. And, that's a really rewarding way to direct your energies into things that make a difference around you.
Yeah, definitely. I think, it's really important when things get a little bit overwhelming or you start to get a little bit bogged in the weeds. Yeah, going out and actually taking practical action is the best way to kind of clear the head and make sure that you're actually creating a tangible difference. So taking action on a farm, like you're talking about, going out and planting trees, getting out there, getting involved with community groups and actually driving positive action. You briefly touched on there your farming business and kind of the journey to you both being on the property. But I think there's a bit more to this story. So I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about that journey of Temple Peak Station and how the farm's changed over time.
So Mark bought it in 1979 with a lot of family help. He ran it by himself for a couple of years. And then I rocked on in from the other side of the world and thought, gosh, this is pretty cool. And so we were driven like, lots of young people by debt and thinking we were doing the right thing by pushing numbers up. And the Livestock Incentive Schemes certainly encouraged that. So we ran purebred merinos, Moosery merinos. But we're high rainfall. Our rainfall, something like 1,800 mils, I think. And they struggled. We were pushing them too hard. And it was a big change from Central Otago to the very wet hills of Glenorchy. So in about 2000, we changed to dune merinos. They've got good wool. They haven't got as much wool, but, they've been bred for their fattening capabilities. And that's made a huge difference to us because we still sell our wool through New Zealand Merino, but we get fat hoggers to sell as well. So it just gives us another string to our bow. We've been really lucky with New Zealand Merino because they've been early leaders, I think, and they've been really thoughtful in anticipating what's coming down the track for selling commodities. And so when they started being interested in what regen ag might look like, they looked at some of the people who were probably further to the back of the pack. And we've been really fortunate. They've done an awful lot of research on our place to try and understand what regen ag might look like. And they held quite a few really good workshops. And that really piqued our interest because the prescriptive formula of farming wasn't delivering particularly good results or an enormous sense of satisfaction. So we started experimenting with mixed species paddocks, which has been hugely successful.
Yeah, and I love that you bring that back to the soil. And speaking of Nicole Masters, for those who haven't heard yet. She's actually coming back to New Zealand and doing some workshops in November. So this will be released before then. So I will put the links in the show notes to make sure people can jump along and sign up if you're interested. We're definitely going along. And if you haven't read or listened to her book yet, For the Love of Soil, highly recommend that also. It's a great place to start. So Amanda, I wonder if you could just go through what that journey was to be Carbon Zero accredited.
Yeah, it's been a really interesting journey as far as we're concerned. And again, very much thanks to the involvement of New Zealand Merino. We've had a wool contract with Allbirds, and they have been really focused on the carbon footprint of their brand. And so they were really interested to look at the raw material space there. And so we had quite a lot of work done. Firstly, some deep soil tests that showed over 45 years of pastoral farming, we hadn't diminished the soil carbon. And they also did quite a lot of work on what's the sequestration of a place like ours, which had a lot of regenerating grey shrubland, manuka, and also we've got bush-clad gorges. So we came out knowing that carbon stocks were still good, which I think is reasonably common across sheep and beef races. And also knowing that we were sequestering about 2,300, 2,400 tonnes of CO2 equivalent a year with the vegetation on the place. So we then did an overseer file to see what our emissions were, and they come out between 15 and 1,600 tonnes of CO2 equivalent. So we are carbon positive. So having got all that raw material, it seems silly not to go to final step and get the Toitū accreditation. So we did that for the first time last year, and I'm just in the process of redoing that now. But, it's an expensive process, and without the help of New Zealand Merino, we probably wouldn't have done it unless we can see that there'll be benefit to us from selling our wool and selling our meat. The brands are all talking about consumers wanting nature positive produce, but we're not really seeing a massive price premium yet. So a really interesting space, really happy to do it so that we can eyeball our mokopuna, but whether it's commercially worth it at the moment, I don't know.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting space to play in, isn't it? Where sort of farmers are leading the charge in having the accreditations or the certifications or having the data sets around these not just carbon positive solutions, but nature positive solutions. And then how do we follow that around with market premiums? Are there going to be market premiums for these? And if so, then what does the commercial viability look like?
Yeah, and that plays into this whole idea of biodiversity credits or nature positive credits, impact credits, whatever you want to call them. But I think that could be a really important space for agriculture, particularly sheep and beef places, which are struggling financially. We often retain really good biodiversity on our farms, and it would be really, really cool to think that was benefited that. I've been part of the Routeburn Dart Wildlife Trust for 10 years since its inception, and we've initiated and maintained a really good trekking network on the Brady Rivers at the head of the lake. And Doc does an awful lot of work in the national park, in the alpine areas and in the bush. And we felt that if we picked up the Brady Rivers, we've got that real vegetation mix from the valley floor to the top of the hill. And I'm also part of Southern Lake Sanctuary, which is a consortium of all the trekking groups in the Southern Lakes area. And we've come together as Southern Lake Sanctuary to really try and focus on landscape scale, predator control. We all know we live in a pretty special place, but we often forget that a large chunk of the Southern Lakes area has got World Heritage classification, so it's significant not only in New Zealand, but it's globally significant. And the story of our bird being the iconic part of the New Zealand makeup is often not well understood overseas. I think we can do a much better job. And with brands saying that people are wanting nature positive solutions, we can certainly offer some really, really good outlets for them to invest in grassroots predator control, which is going to make a real difference to biodiversity in New Zealand. And it's really good to have that farmer initiated too.
Yeah, I agree. Actually, I think we're just starting to see more education and engagement in this space. And certainly my daughter came home and last night she was talking about voting for the Forest and Bird of the Year. And we were going through together all the different birds, even some of the extinct birds that are on that list. And yeah, what a great platform to engage children with why our bird life is so important, not just for us as New Zealanders, but actually on a global scale. And yeah, I just think that those nature positive solutions are an amazing opportunity for investment for brands that, as you say, consumers are asking for these values. The best way that brands can lean into those is invest in practical, on the ground, farmer driven solutions.
But also to bring those individual farmer initiatives together. I mean, we've had a couple of great developments at the head of the lake. So back in August, 9 or 10 pairs of takahe were released into the Greenstone Valley, which is still actively farmed. I mean, that's a really exciting space. They've been breeding up takahe for quite some time now, and the Murchison Mountains are full. Most of the bird sanctuaries are full. So the next step is to take risk in areas that are trapped, but the birds will be faced with some level of risk because we can't reduce the feral cat numbers down to zero, and rats and stoats. So that was amazing to see those iconic species being brought back to areas where they once roamed. And there'll be 2 more releases there. And then the next focus is going to be the head of the Reef Valley because the vegetation there is very suitable for takahe. And it's a really exciting initiative on land farmed by the Scott family.
Yeah, it's really cool to see. I look forward to seeing how they go. And full credit as well to that takahe program that's got them to this point now where they're ready to have enough resiliency in it to take that next risk.
Well, it's a really cool story, isn't it, about farmers trying to do the right thing by conservation. There's been in the firing line, probably justifiably. We haven't told our own stories and let other people tell them. But there are some really cool initiatives happening and they're really exciting.
There sure is. Now, talking about stories then, what is your funniest story relating to farming or agriculture?
Look, we were thinking about that last night and, it basically comes to the stage, if you didn't have a sense of humour, you wouldn't farm in the first place. I think it's a compulsory characteristic because it doesn't always go right. And if you can't laugh about it, you'd lose the plot. So nothing specific, but yeah, you just got to have a healthy sense of humour to get you through.
Yeah, you definitely do. What's the saying? If you don't laugh, you cry. There's certainly a lot of moments where I think my husband and I just have to look at each other and laugh because it's just that situation where sometimes it's just so ridiculous you can't even believe you've got yourself into that predicament, right?
Well, I think the nicest thing about moving to the Doonies is that we no longer have to dirty clean ewes at weaning, and that was always tense. You definitely need your sense of humour.
Did you know that the whole story was a certified B Corp? Well, we are, but what does that mean? B Corps are businesses that are committed to balancing purpose and profit as a means of being a force for good in the world. But that commitment goes beyond good intentions. The truth is, any business can claim to be sustainable or socially responsible. However, without validation, they're just words. So B Corp certification gives them meaning. It provides visibility into the things that we're doing and the impacts that we're having. B Corp certification is a demanding process that includes the B Impact Assessment that evaluates how our operations and business models impact workers, the community, the environment, and customers. Unlike other certifications, B Corp certification doesn't just evaluate a product, process, or service, it measures the company's entire social and environmental impact. It's the only certification program of its kind, and it uses rigorous assessment framework that lends credibility to companies that achieve it. It gives confidence to the growing number of customers that want to buy and work with purpose-driven brands. So when you're next making a purchasing decision or a brand partnership decision, look for the B in the circle. That way you can know with certainty that the organisation you're dealing with is committed to being a force for good in the world.
And so back to sustainability then, what has been some of the low-hanging fruit with regard to sustainability initiatives you've found in your business?
Yeah, I think grading management is the easiest one to pick up on. You can just try and leave a bigger residual and watch how quickly that paddock bounces back. That's made a huge difference to us, keeping longer covers as much as possible. Yeah, looking at the soils and just seeing what's happening under the paddock rather than focusing on the pasture itself. That's been really fascinating. And, just watching worm numbers build up I mean, there's a hell of a soil biology you can't see, but the worms are always a really good indicator. They're always nice to turn over, a spadeful of soil and see a lot of them cruising around. The mixed species paddocks, they've made a huge difference to soil health and animal health. Stock seem to really like having that variety. What else? The aerators made a huge difference to us. After a rainfall, you can feel a difference in your feet between a paddock that's been recently aerated and one that hasn't. The water gets away and it's spongy as opposed to solid. And just that pleasure of being much more aware of the farm as a living system. That's the cool part about doing predator control, noticing all those species slowly coming back. It's good. Yeah, I think those are the main low-hanging fruit we've seen the benefit of.
Yeah, and what an extensive list of low-hanging fruit. That's pretty impressive and manageable to get started on. There's nothing there that is sort of in the too hard basket to start exploring and trying out on your farm.
Well, I think, Regen Ag has faced a lot of criticism by not having prescriptive solutions, but that's its real bonus. It's just a great big shopping list and figure out which bits of the list work for you.
Because every farm's different, right? Like the solutions that work for you are not going to be the solutions that work for the likes of us in a very low rainfall environment on the other side of the hill over in Central. So it's horses for courses, but having a list of things to be able to prompt you to explore and trial and learn as you go.
Yeah, I think so. And it's really exciting. It brings that learning right back front and centre again. We've really enjoyed that in recent years.
Yeah, and speaking about that enjoyment and excitement, what's exciting you most about your farming business over the next 5 years?
We're really excited to see the next generation going to have a go. We're a smaller farm. It's going to be a challenge for them because returns haven't really improved much over the last 10 years. But it's great to see one of our kids putting their hands up and saying, well, we'll give it a go. It's a pretty special place. And as a family, we all love it and want to hang on to it. But we're getting a bit long in the tooth and we need someone else to do the hard work. So that's a really exciting step for us. Carbon Zero accreditation has been a big deal. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out in the market and how we can take that forward to bigger rewards. I believe as agriculture we do have to face up to our climate change responsibilities. I don't know that carbon credits are the best way to do that. I've said before, I really like the idea of biodiversity credits and nature positive solutions and figuring out how we can monetize that. We've really enjoyed seeing the steady expansion of predator control across the head of the lake. We manage 3 trap lines on our farm and there's a new trap line gone in the Tuffolk run by Southern Lake Sanctuary. And it's been lovely watching the map over the past 10 years of the number of traps in the valley. And, with time, they're making a really big difference. So that's really exciting. And all that stuff in the biodiversity space is really interesting and exciting and good news for everyone, I think. What else is exciting about it all? Yeah, I think, we're coming towards the end of our farming career and, we've had to change our thinking as the next generations come along because we think we have a huge responsibility to try and get it right. And it's really good watching our kids wanting to take on the farm and actually then watching their kids having the freedom to free range. Anyone who's got access to a patch of land, it's the biggest privilege in the world now. So, I think those things are the excitement. And figuring out what Regen Ag looks like, there's always more to learn.
What you touch on there is so poignant about watching your children step up and take on that role and that connection with land and then watching their children free ranging. I mean, it's certainly something that I hope we get to be in that position too, to watch that changing of the guard and links right back to the start of our conversation around that belonging and connection over land within communities, but also within families as well. Such a really important part of why we do what we do. Makes me quite emotional to think about, and I'm sure it does for yourself as well.
Actually, one of the nicest quotes I've ever read, an English hill country shepherd called James Rebanks, who's been a very articulate contributor to the farming conversation. And one comment from his first autobiographical book was, he'd been on the farm quite some time, and he said, I think I'm starting to hear the music of the valley. And I think as farmers, we spend an awful lot of time walking over the land, and it's a pretty cool feeling to have known that you've walked over just about all the bits of the farm and chased sheep in some extraordinary places. It's a lovely relationship to have done that over a long period.
Really is. And so to touch on there, you referenced someone who's been quite eloquent in their description of farming. I wonder then, what has been some of the best farming advice you've ever received?
We've always been very lucky to have had a lot of support from Mark's family. I mean, without them, he wouldn't have been able to buy the place in 1979. And Mark's dad particularly was a great physical help too. He always came and turned up at the crucial times of year and gave us a hand. And it was him who pointed out that we really weren't doing a very good job of purebred merinos in our high rainfall, so why didn't we try doing merinos? And that's probably been the single best piece of advice we've had. They've got amazing survivability, and we end up with a fat hogget to sell into that Solaire market. So we get a meat check, and we also get a fine wool fleece, and we've increased the lambing percentage, and we've got much better stock survivability.
And how did you, what's the word I'm looking for here, almost remove your ego a little bit from the farm system that was existing to change to a different breed? Because it's quite a big decision to make once you've invested in a path of farming to then change that. Was that a difficult pill to swallow?
No, I mean, he'd been drip feeding advice all the way through, so it was just another bit of useful information. And he tracked down a sale that was happening and said, Mark, we show up and see what was there. And it was an easy step, but one we probably wouldn't have got to anywhere near as quickly by ourselves. I mean, they're still merinos. You can still sell in fine wool contracts, but you get the benefit of a fat hogget plus their survivability. They're a very resilient breed. I mean, we've had to build the sheep yards a bit higher. They're the biggest jumping bastards you've ever seen, but they've got a will to live, which is great.
So another question then, and probably a tricky one, but with the fast pace of change and never-ending list that's constantly coming at us, how do you and Mark prevent overwhelm, burnout, or at worst apathy and stand up to face the challenge in front of you?
Gosh, it's a challenging one, isn't it?
Big question.
Well, you've got to believe in what you're doing. And I think you have to ignore some of the stuff out in the media. Because we've been looking at what happens with the next generation, there is the opportunity to just remove all the stock and shut this place up. But I think it would be a better place. It's really good to be able to mix farming and conservation in the same space. We're incredibly lucky that we've got an amazing office, and when you're feeling down and out, but you must bring a mob of sheep in, it's pretty hard to be immune to that view. I think we're lucky in the communities that we live in. We're not just a farming community. We've got other people with other interests, and so there's always other things to discuss. You're not getting everybody frustrated by legislation or frustrated by falling prices. There's lots of other conversations going on as well. And there's some really good stuff happening in the community on all sorts of levels. So, yeah, I think being part of the community has been a huge part of keeping going and getting real joy in life.
Yeah, I think to summarise that, what you said there was believing in what you do, taking moments to reflect on the incredible offices that we choose to work in, and also being a part of your community and distancing yourself from perhaps the echo chamber, finding diversity of thought and conversation and not getting too bogged down in the negative narratives.
Yeah, the negative narrative, it's a challenging one. Agriculture is a very large part of New Zealand's emissions, and we do need to front up to that. Sheep and beef farmers have got the slightly more raw end of the deal, but we do all need to know what our carbon footprint is and figure out how we're going to ameliorate that, either through letting the scrub biodiversity expand or by replanting or whatever. Yeah, but I think because of the negativity, I think a lot of us have just kept on doing what we can, but not told the story. And, people like you who are out there telling a positive story of what people are trying to do is really helpful.
Yeah, thank you. It's certainly one of the reasons I'm passionate about doing this, is changing that narrative and bringing some positivity. And I think that using a common purpose to unite us in action towards climate change, rather than using a common purpose to divide us, because I think at the moment a lot of division is caused in the wake of the climate change conversation, but actually we should be using that conversation to unite us and bring us all together.
Oh, I think so. And we've got to learn how to have very wide range of views around the table, but figure out some common solutions. But it does take time, and it takes an awful lot of talking, and it takes building good relationships. And a lot of the legislation in itself is not heinous, but implementation of the legislation has been lacking. And I think we have to be much more realistic on timeframes, and we have to have all those conversations.
Yeah, and not just the talking piece, but the listening piece, right?
Yeah, we've got some fairly major problems ahead of us, and we've just got to sit around and sort them out, haven't we?
That's dead right.
I think they need to get all the grannies together, actually.
So we do like to leave our listeners back down at the ground level, Amanda, which I'm sure you can appreciate. So if you had one take-home sustainability tip for other farming businesses, what would it be?
Oh, gosh, can you condense anything into a little buzzword? I don't know that you can. Look, it's a journey, and it's a really interesting, exciting journey. We're only on the start of it, but I suppose carry a spade, look at what's happening in the soil, and get some easy wins by leaving a bit more residual.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I love how you were stumped by the sort of condensing it, but carrying a spade is a really important starting point, and it's something that practically minded farming folks can certainly start to do today. So everyone out there, grab a spade, make sure you're carrying it with you and looking at what's happening under the soil, not just on top. I want to take the time now, Amanda, to thank you so much for joining me today. It's been lovely to connect with you and to catch up over this conversation. And I want to thank you so much for having the bravery and the courage, both you and Mark, to lead in this space and do it in such a humble fashion. It's been really, really incredible to hear about your involvement, not only on Temple Peak, but also in the community and all of the hard mahi you do. And thank you very much. And thank you for taking the time to connect with our audience today.
No, thank you. Thanks for giving an opportunity.
This episode left me quite emotional. I think it was the depth of connection that Amanda obviously has with Temple Peak Station and the care that she so openly expresses for its future and the future of her own family on that land. Let's highlight some of the sustainable development goals we covered in our conversation today. Firstly, it's hard to look past goal number 15, life on land, with Amanda's obvious passion for predator management and biodiversity restoration and protection. We often forget about this component when fencing and planting on farms, so it's really important to build it into our planning. The next goal, which is unmissable in this episode, is the importance of goal number 11, sustainable cities and communities. Living remotely in Glenorchy is a challenge, but they are blessed by a vibrant, diverse and supportive community. Amanda brings up several times how important the sense of belonging is, and in her own definition of sustainability, which is informed by the concept of sufficiency, she refers back to the values inherent in a sustainable community, of kindness, care, less of a transactional focus, but more of a relational focus on life, and living within our ecological limits. Amanda highlights the need to unite over goal number 13, climate change, and take responsibility for the role that we play in this. This challenge should be something that brings us together rather than divides us, and that perhaps we need to get all the grannies around the table to sort this one out. As part of the climate change conversation, we discussed the monetisation of this climate action and heard Amanda's thoughts on carbon credits, biodiversity credits, and her call for investment from companies whose conscious consumers are asking for nature-positive products into farmer-led and collaborative nature-positive solutions. These thoughts contribute to goal number 8, decent work and economic growth, as without investment to be able to cash flow nature-positive action, nobody wins. Goal number 17 is interwoven throughout our conversation, both referring to the collaborative nature with which farmers should work in the space of conservation, but also in the sense that without a strong partnership with New Zealand Merino, Temple Peak Station may not have had the exposure or support to take up the opportunities to explore regenerative agriculture and to obtain Carbon Zero certification. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Whole Story podcast. We really hope you enjoyed it and are feeling inspired and optimistic about putting sustainability into practice on farm. I have one last request for you before you go. Make sure, whatever platform you're listening to us on, that you hit follow and share the show or episodes with your friends, so that together we can grow our community and inspire sustainability in agriculture in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And thanks again to FMG for partnering with The Whole Story, so that we could bring this podcast to life for you all to enjoy. Catch you next time.